previous videos, we have talked about the routes by which persuasion occurs. In this video, we are going to talk about the elements of the persuasion itself. What do you think are the elements of persuasion? Well, among the primary ingredients of persuasion explored by social psychologists are these four: the communicator, the message, how the message is communicated, and the audience. In other words, who says what by what method and to whom. First, let's talk about the communicator. Imagine being persuaded by a very sedentary person about what he calls the best exercise regimen to stay fit. Would you believe him? Would it be any different if the regimen was said by a health instructor? Of course. Who says the message often matters as much as what is being said. The same message coming from two different sources can elicit different reactions. What then makes one communicator more persuasive than another? Well, there are a few factors that contribute to the persuasiveness of a communicator. The first one is source credibility. Source credibility can come from either perceived expertise or perceived trustworthiness. While perceived expertise refers to the degree to which a source is considered to be capable of making valid assertions, perceived trustworthiness refers to the degree of confidence that a source is motivated to communicate valid assertions. One question that you may ask is there any possibility that non-credible sources have persuasive impact? The answer is yes, they can. The sleeper effect states that information or arguments from non-credible sources may be rejected initially, but can be accepted over time. This occurs when people remember the message better than the reasoning for discounting it, or if people forget the source or its connection with the message. Another factor that contributes to the persuasiveness of a communicator is attractiveness and liking. Attractiveness exists in several forms. Physical attractiveness is one. Arguments, especially emotional ones, are more influential when they come from people we consider beautiful. Similarity is another form of attractiveness. We tend to like people who are like us. People who act as we do, subtly mimicking our postures, are likewise more influential. The salespeople are sometimes taught to mimic and mirror. If the customer's arms or legs are crossed, cross yours. If she smiles, smile back. Our liking of someone may open us up to the communicator's arguments via the central route to persuasion, or it may trigger positive associations when we see the product later via the peripheral route to persuasion. For example, a good friend of mine has always believed that drying her hair with a towel is healthier for her hair roots. But one day, she heard Jimin of BTS saying that you get more hair falls if you don't dry your hair quickly using a hairdryer. My good friend then did some thorough research on which option is better, only to find that Jimin of BTS is right. Her liking of BTS has led her to open up to Jimin's arguments via the central route to persuasion. Let's move on to the next element, which is the message itself. It matters not only who says something, but also what that person says. When speaking about persuasive arguments, several questions might pop in your head. Is a logical or emotional message more persuasive? Should the message express your side only, or should it acknowledge and refute the opposing views? And if people are present for both sides, is there an advantage to going first or last? Let's examine these questions one at a time. Now let's talk about reason versus emotion. Is an argument best when reasonable or emotional? The answer is, it depends on the audience. Well-educated, analytical, or involved audiences are responsive to rational appeals. In other words, communication occurs via the central route to persuasion. Disinterested audiences travel the peripheral route. They are more affected by how much they like the communicator. It also depends on how people's attitudes were formed. When people's initial attitudes are formed primarily through emotion, they are more persuaded by later emotional appeals. When their initial attitudes are formed primarily through reason, they are more persuaded by later intellectual arguments. Another issue that persuaders need to take decision on is whether the message should be one-sided and tell the target audience only about the pros, or should it be two-sided and tell the audience about both the pros and cons. Research by Hofland found that the effectiveness of the message depended on the listeners. A one-sided appeal was most effective with those who already agreed. An appeal that acknowledged opposing arguments worked better with those who disagreed. Another issue is primacy versus recency. Imagine that you are a consultant to a presidential candidate who must soon debate on a controversial issue. 3 weeks before the vote, each politician is to appear on Mata Najwa. By the flip of a coin, your side receives the choice of whether to speak first or last. Knowing that you are a formal social psychology student, everyone looks to you for advice. Would first be best, or would last be best? Well, the answer is both are effective in different conditions. When two persuasive messages are back to back and the audience then thinks or responds at some later time, the first message has the advantage or known as primacy effect. When the two messages are separated in time and the audience think and responds soon after the second message has the advantage or known as recency effect. The third element is channel of communication. Is it best to use a face-to-face appeal, a written sign, a media advertisement, or some other method? Well, usually face-to-face appeal works best. Print media can be effective for complex messages, while the mass media can be effective when the issue is minor or unfamiliar. The last element is the audience. In this slide, we will focus on two characteristics, age and need for cognition. The teen and early 20s are important formative years. Attitudes are changeable during that time, and the attitudes formed then tend to stabilize through middle adulthood. That is why many politicians focus on young adults or what is known as swing voters. Another factor is need for cognition, which has already been explained several moments ago as well as the previous video. Analytical people, or those with high need for cognition, prefer central routes to persuasion. Meanwhile, people with low need for cognition are quicker to respond to peripheral cues. This is the end of our lecture on persuasive communication. If you want to find out more, head on to the references on your screen. Please also note that in each slide of all videos, there is a citation on the bottom right hand of your screen in case you feel the need for more elaboration. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time!